Let's get started again. Welcome back from lunch. It's our pleasure to introduce Andrea Pacheco from the Texas Broadband Development Office and her posse. So thank you so much for coming. Very much appreciated. For the next hour, I'll turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Larry. And thank you everyone for having me here. I'm excited to be here. Larry had asked me, I don't usually do this much of talking about myself, but Larry had asked me to kind of introduce myself and let you know kind of how I ended up in the broadband office. So with that, I was an elementary school teacher for 22 years. I started teaching in 1998. Back in 1998, most classrooms didn't have a computer in them. If they did have a computer, they were mostly for the teachers. Students weren't using them at all. I was teaching in a life skills class, and so I had some students that were nonverbal. And I had one particular student that was nonverbal but very smart and was getting very frustrated at not being able to communicate. And so there was brand new cutting technology, this device where you could put picture symbols on the device and he could touch it and the device would speak for him. Now, because this was cutting edge technology, it was very expensive. And so I had to go to bat to get this technology for my student with the school district. So I had to collect data on his communication abilities and his, just all kinds of data. And I really had to work hard to get him the technology he needed. So the very first year I started teaching, I was working to get technology into my students' hands. As my career progressed, I moved into the regular ed classroom as an inclusion teacher. In the regular ed classroom, when I first started, again, it was just the computers were there for teachers, not really there for students. But eventually we came to the point where tools started being developed for students. And we did not have the equipment or the internet connection to allow my students to take full advantage of the technology that was available to them, to the point where there were state-adopted curriculum had digital components included in them. And in my classroom, I had 3 dinosaur desktop computers that worked, in various states of disrepair depending on the day. And so I began again trying to get technology into my class. My teammates and I wrote grants. We did donors choose projects. We begged, we borrowed, we didn't steal, but we did everything we could to try and get devices in our students' hands. And so eventually we got a 2-to-1 ratio in the classroom. And then COVID hit. And so when COVID hit, in March, I finished teaching from March until the end of the school year. We sort of taught remotely, which was very challenging because at that point, not everybody had access to technology, internet connectivity. We were sending buses out to help with hotspots for students. Luckily, my district was able to get one-to-one devices for all our students by the next school year. So as far as COVID went, in AISD, we were actually pretty lucky. So all of my students had devices. Connectivity was a little bit spotty for some of them. We were able to get a hold of hotspots. So we were excited. We had all this technology. Teaching in COVID was still a nice little challenge. But once we got through it and things got back to normal the next year, we did have one-to-one devices, which was huge for us. But an important thing to keep in mind is that these are, I was teaching 1st and 2nd grade. These students are not exactly easy on their devices. And so this was kind of a Band-Aid. The school used funds for the one-to-one devices. They used funds from, I of course was a teacher and I don't know exactly, but it was coronavirus funding that brought these devices. And I guarantee there's not money in the budget to replace all these devices and maintain one-on-one for K through 12. So all of that to say, I was fighting the digital divide from the day I started teaching until the day I stopped teaching without even realizing what the digital divide was. So the way I ended up at the Broadband Development Office, I won't get into the details of teaching in Texas, but it just became a career that was not viable for me any longer. And so I wanted to leave the classroom, but I had no idea what I wanted to do next. I a teacher. I'd always wanted to be a teacher. I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do. But I knew that I wanted to do something that I could be passionate about. And so by luck, a friend of a friend had heard I was leaving teaching and told me about this job at the Broadband Development Office. And I thought, hey, I've been trying to get my students connected forever. Now I can do it on a higher level. So here I am. Long story short, I'm now the outreach coordinator at the Broadband Development Office. I feel so blessed to have found this position. I get to work with some really dedicated public servants who are all very passionate about getting all residents and businesses connected to the internet. Our ultimate goal, of course, at the Broadband Development Office is universal connectivity in the state. So that's me. Now we'll move on to the digital divide. So according to the American Community Survey, there are approximately 3 million households equaling 7 million people in the state that still aren't connected to reliable high-speed internet. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. Not having access to the internet isn't just about not being able to stream Netflix or play video games anymore. It's telehealth, it's the economy, it's shopping. The list just goes on and on. There's really not a part of our lives that the internet doesn't really help us with. And so that really puts people that don't have access to this at a great disadvantage. And we've identified 3 main barriers for reasons why people are not having access to the internet. Of course, especially in our rural areas, there's just a lack of actual infrastructure. We've also identified digital literacy. So in areas where people might have access to the internet, they don't know how to use it safely or at all, or don't. And surprisingly, we've done a lot of public engagement and tour, and I was kind of surprised to see how many people that have never had access don't understand the value in it and aren't interested in it. And then finally, affordability, of course, and then access to devices that they can use. So in response to the digital divide, the 87th legislature created the Broadband Development Office with House Bill 5, which was authored by Representative Trent Ashby. When our office was created, we were housed within the Comptroller's office. So we've been very fortunate. Comptroller Glenn Hager is very supportive of expanding broadband. And so he has allowed us, we have a lot of access to his communications team supports us, his contracts team. So we have a lot of support within the Comptroller's office. So when we were created, we were given 4 main objectives. Our first one was to create the state's first broadband plan. And when we went out to create this plan, we were one of only 5 states in the country that did not already have a plan in place. So we're kind of behind on all of this. And I forgot to mention, so we were created in September of 2021. So we are a very new office. So we hit the road. Comptroller Glenn Hager actually went with us on a 12-stop public listening tour to kind of identify those barriers, collect some data, and understand what broadband looked like in the state at that time. We published the state's first ever broadband plan in June of 2022. That plan is still available. It is on our website, broadbandfortexas.com. We have created some more current documents, and so I'll talk a little bit more about those in just a minute. We were also tasked with creating the Texas First Broadband Availability Map. That has presented quite a challenge for us, as anyone involved with the mapping, with the federal map and our map could probably attest to. But we did publish our first map in January of 2023, and we are really excited about the next version of our map. That is still being developed, but we're pretty confident that it's going to align much better with the federal government's map, and so we're hoping that will eliminate a lot of issues that we've faced with mapping. Of course, we were created to implement broadband development programs using through grants. We're establishing grant programs using both state and federal funds. And then finally, we're serving as an information clearinghouse for the state and federal funding opportunities. So our community outreach, trying to keep our stakeholders informed on what's going on and what's available in the state, is a big part of what we do. The bill also created a board of advisors for us. We have, which is chaired by the comptroller, and we have 7 appointed members. Our director, Greg Conti, serves on the board. He's a non-voting member. Well, we're not voting. He's a member of the board. And then the other members are appointed by the governor, lieutenant governor, and speaker of the house. We do meet twice a year now. For a while we were meeting every other month, but due to legislative updates, we now only meet twice a year. And our next meeting is February 29th at 2 o'clock. That is a hybrid meeting. So we have it available both in person and in virtually. And later in the slides, I have that information with links. And if you're interested in joining us at one of those meetings. So now we'll move on to our different tranches of funding. We have several different streams of funding coming from different sources. Our first main source of funding came from ARPA, the Coronavirus Capital Projects Funds. These funds are being administered by the U.S. Treasury. Texas was allocated just over $500 million. These funds were meant to ensure that all communities have access to high-speed, quality, modern infrastructure. And those funds do need to be expended by December 2026. When we were looking at proposing how to spend those funds, we worked with several state agencies. We first had the Texas State Library and Archives Commission, or TSLAC, has a program to modernize some select libraries throughout the state. They were actually awarded $9.4 million to complete their project. And so they have already hit the ground and are developing that program. Next, the Texas Department of Agriculture had a program to modernize some rural hospitals, and they were just recently awarded the almost $24 million. Our next project is TxDOT is working to get connectivity to some rest stops in the El Paso area. I'm from El Paso. I don't know if y'all have been there. There's long stretches of road with nothing. And so they're trying to get some of the rest stops wired so that people can have access to that. That program is still incurring going back and forth with U.S. Treasury. So we're hoping to get that program approved soon. The next program is our pole replacement program. The pole replacement program was actually created in House Bill 1505 in the 87th session with $75 million. We were hoping to get this through our ARPA funding. A lot of back and forth with U.S. Treasury not working out. So we're actually going to be getting that $75 million from the Texas Broadband Infrastructure Fund, and I'll talk more about what that is in just a little bit. And then finally, that brings us to where the majority of that $500 million is going to. It's the Last Mile Connectivity Program, which is the grant program that we just set up. And so we use our first program, we called it the Bringing Online Opportunities to Texas, or BOOT program. And this program was intended to connect end users to the internet. Since this was our office's very first grant program, we did not make the full $364 million available for this round of BOOT. We only made $120 million available just so we could it's our very first grant program. We're new. We wanted to learn lessons. And so eligible applicants included political subdivisions and service providers. It ended up, or partnerships between the two. All of our applicants, though, were actually internet service providers. The projects were required to bring at least 100 over 20 megabits to all locations within their projects. They were required to participate in the Affordable Connectivity Program, or the ACP. I don't know if you've heard. The ACP is running out of money. It looks like it's most likely going to wind down. The FCC issued an order earlier this month on instructing ISPs on ways to how they're going to start winding down this funding. There are 2 bills that have been introduced in Congress to extend the funding, but we haven't, aside from them being introduced, we haven't really seen any movement on that. So there's a very good chance that April will be the last month that ACP is fully funded. And then another requirement was that all our providers give a universally available low-cost option. So those were kind of the main requirements under our BOOT program. We issued or published our NOFA on March 6th and accepted applications from April 3rd to May 5th. We posted them for a month in July and allowed people to challenge applications based on project eligibility and applicant eligibility. Right now, we are in the middle. We're finishing up evaluating those applications and working on determining those awards. We hope to announce awards in early spring. And then BOOT round 2, we're not going to do a timeline. We're trying to align BOOT with BEAD to make sure that we don't duplicate funding, and we're still working through the logistics of how those 2 programs might work. So then that brings us to the Broadband Infrastructure Fund that I mentioned earlier. Proposition 8 was passed on November 7th, which created the Broadband Infrastructure Fund, or the BIF, within the Texas Constitution. That money will be financed, that fund is financed through money allocated by the state legislator, gifts, grants, and investment earnings. House Bill 9 appropriated $1.5 billion to that fund. The funds were transferred from the General Revenue Fund to the Broadband Infrastructure Fund on January 8th. So that fund is now fully fully funded. There are some uses that are already going to be prescribed uses for those funds. So Next Generation 911 Service Fund is set to receive just over $155 million. This is just a one-time transfer. Once we transfer those funds, the Commission on State Emergency Communications will take over managing those funds. This is talking about the pole replacement program that I mentioned earlier. So we are going to be transferring $75 million in funds to the Texas Pole Replacement Program, which of course was established in 2021 by House Bill 1505. A little bit more about the pole replacement program. It's really we're really trying to speed up the deployment of broadband in rural areas. And so this is a reimbursement program per pole, and the reimbursement will range from 50% of eligible costs to $5,000, whichever of the 2 is less. Eligible participants would be pole owners or qualifying broadband service providers who've incurred eligible pole replacement costs. We are currently, our lovely Jesse Troublefield is one of our employees at the office, and he's working hard doing some fact finding, trying to get this program set up and running. So we expect to have details fairly soon. We post all of the information on all our programs on our website, broadbandfortexas.com. So keep an eye out. We should have more information on that very soon.
Out of curiosity, do owners seek pre-approval for the reimbursement of those costs, or is that retroactive?
It's retroactive. Oops, sorry, I'm going in the wrong direction. There we go. So should I stop there for a second for the Broadband Infrastructure Fund and BOOT questions before I move on to our giant pot of money with the IIJA? Okay, I'll keep going then. All right, so then, as I mentioned, our next tranche of funding is coming under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is this money is administered by the NTIA as opposed to the Treasury. Underneath the IIJA program, we have two different funding programs. So we have the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, or BEAD program. The BEAD program, these funds are meant to build infrastructure in the state, to actually connect and close the availability gap. Texas allocation was $3.3 billion, which is by far and away the biggest allocation in the country, which is exciting and good for Texas, but also reflective of just how much work we have to do. And a lot of times people are asking, do we think that $3.3 billion is going to be enough to connect the entire state? And the short answer is we don't think so. The comptroller is projecting it will cost up to $10 billion to connect the entire state. I did want to mention there is a fiber preference within BEAD. So we're using the high cost threshold to determine, try and get as much fiber laid as is reasonable. But of course, Texas terrain, there are just some areas that we're going to need other technologies to get to these locations. The second program that's housed underneath IIJA is the Digital Equity Act. In Texas, we refer to it as digital opportunity instead of digital equity. The Digital Equity Act funds are intended to close the affordability and digital literacy, those sorts of gaps in service. And so we are expected to get an allocation of $130 million for those programs. We're still waiting. We haven't heard what the exact allocation will be yet. So in order to use the IIJA funds, there's been a lot of preparation and requirements through BEAD. Public engagement was a huge part of our planning. We had 3 major planning documents that we're having to submit to NTIA, and we used a robust public engagement model to really try and inform all 3 of these documents and make sure that all Texans have had a voice and get to really have a say in how these funds are going to be spent. So we strategically, the challenges in Texas are huge. We're such a large and diverse state. We have all these different regions with different needs. And so we broke up the state into regions. Well, first we created one statewide working group. So this statewide working group kind of gave us their input and feedback on a high-level view of internet in the state. And we really tried to make sure that all of our covered populations were represented on our statewide working group. We met with them virtually 4 times. We would give them homework about questions, and we got some great feedback from them. Then we created 6 outcome-specific task forces. So we had a business and telecom task force, we had a health task force, education. We had 6 different task forces to help us look at internet need through specific industry lenses. And again, we met with them virtually 4 times as well, and they gave us their input. And then finally, we created 12 regional working groups. And our 12 regional working groups are based on the comptroller's 12 economic regions in the state. And so those 12 working groups are really like the boots on the ground, people that are understanding what's happening in their community when it comes to broadband. And so we leaned on those groups heavily to help us plan a public meeting tour. So this is very hot past summer. We were driving all over Texas to get to, we really tried to get to smaller towns that were maybe a little more disconnected than others, to really give residents and community members an opportunity to give us their feedback directly. So the challenge is we were trying to collect data from people about being disconnected that were disconnected. And so it was very challenging to get to those people. So our regional working groups helped us to plan 24 different meetings to try and get as much participation as we could. We then, we also published 3 surveys. We had one survey that we gave to our industry service, our service providers in the state. They definitely have a unique view on how these funds should be spent, and we wanted to give them a way to give us their feedback. We also had a digital asset mapping tool that it was a survey for our organizations in the state. We really were trying to understand what resources were available in the states to help us identify gaps that might exist. And then finally, we had our public meeting, our public survey for all residents 18 and over. We just really wanted to hear about their barriers. You know, we tried our best. We had paper surveys available. It was available in 4 languages. The survey was mobile, cell phone friendly. We did receive over 10,000 responses to our survey. So we took all of that data and then folded it up into our BEAD 5-year action plan. That was our first document that was due to NTIA. Our BEAD 5-year action plan is available. If you'd like a copy, you can just send me an email and I'm happy to send it to you. We have the BEAD 5-year action plan. Similar to our original broadband plan that we first published. It lays out goals and strategies, it has an inventory of what resources are available in the state as well. So we did submit that to NTIA on August 28th. Over just almost to Christmas, the NTIA had us working up to the wire. On December 23rd, we submitted our BEAD initial proposal. The BEAD initial proposal is in 2 volumes. So the first volume, again, talks about, you know, what grant funding programs are available in the state already, but then really lays out our challenge process. So we're going to have a list of eligible locations for BEAD funding, and the challenge process will help us get input from everyone on whether or not the list is accurate. And so we're really encouraging our stakeholders to stay involved in this and really participate in our challenge process, because the more people we have participating in our BEAD challenge process, the better off we're going to be, the more accurate our data is going to be. And once again, if we submitted this, so the BEAD initial proposal both volumes have been submitted but are not approved. So if you request a copy, I'll send you a copy, but know that anything could change based on NTIA's feedback. So volume 1 lays out our BEAD challenge process, and then volume 2 lays out our subgrantee selection process. So that was due on December 23rd. I believe that's a Saturday, isn't it?
It was due the you're good. It was due the 27th. We chose to do the 23rd because we didn't want the website to crash and lose all of our hard work. And also none of us wanted to be working on Christmas. It was a Saturday.
Yeah. So thank you, NTIA. So that was, and before we submitted that, I should mention that we did put it up for public comment for 30 days. During that time, oh goodness, it's been a minute. I think we received comments from 109. Don't quote me on that. I'm sorry, my numbers are getting a little confused in my head, but we had great participation and got a lot of good feedback on the initial proposal. We took the feedback we got, kind of incorporated and revised what we submitted to NTIA. Then our final planning document, well, not the final, the next planning document that is due is our Texas Digital Opportunity Plan. This is our plan for those Digital Equity Act funds that we were speaking about earlier. And so again, we used a lot of the data that we collected from all of our public engagement efforts to inform our Digital Opportunity Plan. And our Digital Opportunity Plan was posted for public comment from November 27th to January 5th. during that time, we did receive 309 comments. That was a little more recent, so that's still solid in my head. 309 comments for our Texas Digital Opportunity Plan, which we're very excited about. So right now, our team is working to incorporate and revise we call it the TDOP, the Texas Digital Opportunity Plan, to kind of revise it to reflect what we received from public comment. And then that plan is due to be turned into NTA on February 28th. So this is just a little bit more about BEAD eligibility. Eligible locations are all unserved. Unserved locations are any locations that are receiving less than 25 over 3 megabits per second. Then it's a tiered system. So we have to make sure that all those unserved locations are getting service first. Then next we move to underserved locations. Those are locations that have service between 25 over 3 and 100 over 20. So they have internet connection, but not that great. If there are any funds left over, we can move on to community anchor institutions. We do not think that there will be funds left over to address community anchor institutions, not from BEAD. Yes, sir.
Yeah, a quick question for you. Not so quick. There you go. You talked about 3 million homes early on in your presentation, right?
Mhm.
And can you give me some scope on that? Is that 3 million unserved or unserved and underserved?
So this data does not align with the data so our data is based on the FCC broadband map. It is what we're going with unserved and underserved locations. Is it 700?
It is 900,000 for unserved location and about 300,000 for underserved locations. That is before the BEAD challenge process.
Yeah, so we're really encouraging people to participate in the BEAD challenge process.
Appreciate that. And where did the 3 million come from earlier then?
It was the Census Bureau did a American community survey.
Okay.
Yeah, the data that we use, like in terms of locations, is different than homes because we are also taking into account multi-dwelling units. So each individual unit can count as a home as well. It's more about how the census tracks it than how FCC tracks it.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. And do you mind me asking questions on
Not
interplay on this? I appreciate that. I guess another question that I had, so you're saying 3 million versus the numbers again, 200,000 and 300,000?
900,000 and 300,000.
900,000, 300,000. Okay, thank you. And so that's what you're looking at, 900 before the challenge process or 300,000 before the challenge on the 3.3. And you're saying it's going to be 10 billion. So you're looking at $10,000-ish per home. Is that the way you're looking at it from that perspective?
I guess I'll stand up and actually introduce myself. Hi, everybody. I'm Erin Bennell. No, you're totally fine. I was kind of hoping we'd never get to this point. I'm Erin Bennell. I'm a broadband development coordinator with the BDO, specifically working on BEAD. So whenever you hear anything about BEAD coming out, just know my fingers were on it. So to answer your question about how much it's going to be, we don't know the exact number because one, we don't know which locations we're going to yet. And each location is going to probably have a different number attached to it. If you're in more heavily populated areas, it's going to be a little bit cheaper to go to each individual location because they're closer together. Whereas if we're like out in rural America, that's going to be longer stretches of fiber. That's going to cost a lot more for each individual location. When we're looking at the data, there are some locations that are going to be about 10,000 per location. There's also other locations that are going to be like 1.2 million with fiber. So really, it's just a balancing act of how we're going to do it.
Okay, appreciate that. And how you're going to do it? I mean, you had a preference for fiber. What about satellite or some of the others that are out there?
Well, the preference, it's not our preference. It's speed requirement. Do we want to?
Yeah, so BEAD does have a fiber preference to it. And then they are, let me put my words together. So we do have a fiber preference that we have to follow with BEAD. We also have something called the extremely high cost per location threshold. Those locations that cost $2 million on their own, no other locations included in the project, those might be considered an extremely high cost location. We can't say for certain. We haven't decided what our threshold is going to be yet. We still need to do some data and figure out everything else from Boot and all of our other great resources. Those areas, those locations that are going to be too high and do not make sense to fund with fiber or to provide fiber to, we then expand the type of technology we're allowed to use. So then we can also put fixed wireless, satellite, other technologies towards those locations.
Okay, appreciate that. And if you don't mind me, one more question. I don't want to hijack your presentation,
you're
but
fine.
you talked about outreach and surveying and trying to get to the more smaller rural communities, right? And it was hard to break through to figure out they didn't know they needed. Just out of curiosity, as part of your surveys, I'm in the wireless business and it just seems like everybody's got a phone. So even in those smaller communities, do they have phones? And is that something that you're looking at? I mean, I'm just curious on how that blends into the overall side of things.
Right. I don't know the number on that, but it was part of our, that was part of our survey, was how many people are using cell phones. That would be in our the 5-year action plan probably lays that out and could do numbers for you. So I don't want to misquote any numbers for you.
Thank you.
Of course.
Any other questions while I have the mic out? All right.
Excellent. Okay. So, but I did want to again highlight that the data that we're going to be using to determine which locations are unserved or underserved will be the FCC's data collection. And so please, please, please participate in the challenge process, because I hear from residents all the time, you know, I'm not getting internet, and then I check on the map and they are someone's claiming to get service to them. So we really want robust participation in our GB challenge process. And of course, our eligible applicants are internet service providers, political subdivisions, and nonprofit organizations, and any combination of partnerships among those. So as I mentioned, we are a brand new office, and so we have tried to set things up in a very transparent and interactive way. We know we're not the experts in the field, and so we really we offer a lot of opportunities for you to interact with us, to give us feedback. We host an industry roundtable. This is a virtual roundtable that we hold on the last Tuesday of every month at 3 o'clock. Our next meeting will be next Tuesday, January 30th. I'm sure you're getting a copy of the slides, but these are linked with the meeting link for you. We also host, it's called a local government roundtable, but it's really for nonprofits, any stakeholders that are interested in staying up to date on our programs. And that one, again, is hosted virtually. That one we have on the first Thursday of every month at 10 a.m. The next one being next week as well on February 1st. I did want to mention that we are doing something called Connection Corner during these roundtables, because we've had a lot of interest from our stakeholders in making connections with different stakeholders, and there's really not currently a good place for us to let people network and get to know each other and understand what resources are available. And so at both meetings, we started doing something called Connection Corner, where usually about 2 or 3 different entities present one slide of like, hey, here's what I'm doing in this space. Here's my contact information if you're interested in participating. And we really want community to be an opportunity for communities to also be like, hey, we had a really big success here, or, you know, the vision hasn't come fully forward. We're having a little bit of problem getting some of our communities to come forward and brag about what they're doing, but that's our vision. So if you're interested in anything like that, I've got my contact information in here, so I'm happy to get anyone on board for participating in our Connection Corner. I already mentioned our BDO Board of Advisors meeting, which is hosted virtually and in person at our office at the LBJ building just up the road a little bit. And then we also do a monthly newsletter. If you subscribe to our monthly newsletter, we also send out updates to when we meet major milestones, we use that same listserv. And then finally, the links to all of our meetings and all of our public outreach efforts, you can, if you're interested in kind of connecting with one of our regional working groups, our task forces we're kind of winding down our task forces for now. They were our working groups for the deliverables that we needed to do, but we are going to be maintaining our regional working groups to kind of keep connected with those communities. All of that information can be found on our outreach web page. I've got a link here, but everything can be accessed from broadbandfortexas.com. There I've got our BDO email and questions. Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Karen. If you can unmute yourself.
Hi. Sure. Great presentation so far. Thanks for the information. I'm piggybacking off his question just a little bit. In the day and age of social media and online shopping, you had mentioned in some areas there's just not the information, or they don't know that they need internet. Does that mean they are using non-smartphones? Is that what you mean? Because it seems like everyone is somewhat knowledgeable about the need for access. Thanks so much.
Sure. I mean, I think people are using whatever technology is available to them. Again, I was very shocked at how many people on our public meeting tour are not accessing, even using smartphones. They not seeing the value in it. So I think that, I hope that answers your question. Yeah, we're seeing all different, whatever technologies are available, people are mostly using, but there are lots of people in the state that do not see value in it, are scared of it, and are not using it at all. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, I can provide a little bit of anecdotal information about that. So you'll just learn all about me today, everybody. I did a year of service before joining the BDO with AmeriCorps, where I served 13 rural communities in South Central Nebraska, where I helped them prepare for BEAD funding and broadband infrastructure and digital opportunity and all that fun stuff. And the number of people who are in positions of leadership for their communities, who have influence in their communities, or have just like lived there their entire lives, are very hesitant about technology as a whole. And I can understand it. Technology moves really, really, really fast, and it's hard to keep up and understand what the privacy and protections are. And that's kind of what digital opportunity is for, is to help everyone become comfortable and aware of the benefits that come with this technology. But there are many people who are either terrified of the technology, don't want to take the time to learn it, or have made the conscious decision not to be so heavily connected and choose to use flip phones, slide phones, pagers, beepers, all of the things from the 90s. It's really just their own personal preference, and each one has a story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question. When it comes to eligibility, thank you. When it comes to eligibility, I know you had a list of public, private, political subdivisions. Is the office looking to favor any one of those over another?
Nope, we just want people connected. Yeah, there's no preference right?
The office does have, so like BDO itself has a preference of if a commercial provider applies, they do get preference over like a municipality applying. That's why we really encourage partnerships. It's also why one of the requirements for all of our programs is letters of support. We have to see some type of support from the community that this is the provider that they're okay with being put in their community.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a need for a community interaction, at least.
Yes, absolutely.
Getting them on board with whoever's going to ultimately win. So that could be a difference maker.
Good thing I brought my subject matter expert with me.
Is that preference because the ISP's investments would theoretically be taxable for sales tax or ad valorem property tax, or ad valorem, property tax or sales and use tax, and the municipalities probably would not?
That is a very interesting question. That is part of our rules and our guidelines of
Okay.
how like the BDO functions. I don't know what the reasoning behind that
Okay.
ruling was that was created before I got here.
Okay, thank you.
So kind of following up on that, if I remember correctly, there are some limitations in Texas as far as who could build a network. That's kind of, because we've seen in other states where you kind of have like electric co-ops or some type that do it, but they can't do it here. Is there any kind of legislative change that's happening to open it up to more people to build, or are you guys familiar with any of that, or involved with any of that?
Any changes that are coming, we are not involved. We're not like a political entity, I don't think. I'm probably going to get an email from someone telling me I need to stop answering questions like that. But no, so we're not involved in any of that kind of decision making. We'll provide like what we know of the situation and let someone else make those decisions and then react accordingly. As for electric co-ops in in like our grant programs are considered a commercial provider. I think there is some legislation, and I don't remember if it got changed in this one or not, that said that the co-ops were not allowed to expand past their service for like electricity for telecommunication. So like that's their boundary. I don't remember if that got changed or not. So please do not use me as a source for that.
One more follow-up on some of the rural areas. I guess the question is, I appreciate the educational outreach and trying to get people to understand the value, but how far do you go with that? I mean, do you build the line to the house? Do you provide them a nice satellite connection on their front door? And maybe they don't want to pay for it, right? I mean, I guess the question is, do you build it regardless if they're going to pay for?
Right. That's a great
What are your thoughts
question.
about how far you go?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, if their location is showing as unserved or underserved on the map, we're going to try and make it available. I mean, they of course don't have to subscribe. I mean, I think that's kind of why we're having to do this kind of subsidizing these projects, because, you know, the making it economically feasible for our internet service providers to go past when, you know, the chances are that they might not. So if it's unserved or underserved, then we will try to get it connected or at least make it available. We will be using the Digital Equity Act funds to try and you know, educate and use digital navigators and create programs where we really are trying to bring those people in and educate them. And, you know, part of adoption is part of our goal, like having people adopting.
Well, then, have you done anything to project demand? I mean, you know, you've got the population, the underserved, you're going out these meetings. Do you have any idea of what sort of true demand there is?
I don't, can you,
Well, the question is, you know, I mean, was, you know, you're going to build into all underserved areas, right? Not served. You mentioned earlier reluctance of people, leaders, things like that. I mean, have you looked at just through polling or anything like that? Some of these communities, wow, you know, 95% of the people say, yeah, that we want this, or anything like that.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, so worried about building a network and then you build it and nobody comes.
It's Field of Dreams.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that we collected that sort of data. It's a great question though.
Again, I think it's more anecdotal than anything else. Like, I mean, we hear these things on the surveys and when we go out into the community for sure. I think as the role of the office, and again, I'm probably going to get yelled at for saying something like this.
Okay.
We accepted the grant, and the grant's rules are we are going to have universal service with BEAD. So not to say like it doesn't matter if they want it or not, but kind of we're bringing service, and they don't have to sign up. That's not a requirement. They're not required to sign up and spend their money on this monthly service. But we always want people to have the option to stay connected, engaged, especially with how far things are coming and how important internet technology is for us.
Yeah. And I guess that providers have a unique perspective on that of, you know, if we give you funds to build it, but then how do you maintain it
Yeah.
if no one's subscribing?
Maybe looking down the road a little bit, and no one's going to hold you to this. But do you guys see like when a date in mind for the subgrantee applications, when that's going to open up for people to start applying?
Yeah, well, everything is dependent on NTIA's approval. I mean, ideally, we would like to start our challenge process in April. It's 180-day.
180-day challenge process, 14 days to submit, 14 to review, 14 to answer or to provide a rebuttal, 14 for us to review, 56 days for us to make a final determination.
Dang, you've got that memorized. And then, once we have the finalized list of eligible locations, and then we can start our subgrantee selection process.
Okay, so you pick the locations that are eligible, and then you start taking the applications for those locations.
Right, correct.
Okay. So 180 days from April. If everything goes
we're
well,
approved,
everything
yeah.
goes well.
And even then, I'd add on a few days because it's going to be 180 days to get the final list of locations and like the full challenge process is complete. We send all of those results to NTIA for final approval. And then maybe NTIA hasn't approved our volume 2 yet, which maps out how we do things. We have to wait till we get approval from that as well.
Yeah.
So 180 days plus a little bit of time.
Yeah, it's important to keep in mind that, every state in the country is participating in BEAD. And so a lot of people are turning in documents in similar timeframes. Louisiana's ahead of the game but most of the states are turning in these documents at a similar time. So we're just really not sure how long things are going to take to get approved.
Hopefully not on Saturday.
If it needs to be. This girl, she's from Nebraska, traveled home to Nebraska and then started working again on Saturday. She's a dynamo. We lucked out getting this one.
I have one more question surrounding the population, if you don't mind. You mentioned 900,000, 300, 1.2 million households from the BEAD program. The other survey was 3 million-ish. So you're making the plea, let's challenge it. We should get that number higher than the 1.2 is what you'd like to see for more funding or going back to the feds, however you want to look at that. I guess the question that I have is the 1.2 or the 3 million, how does that stack up against households in Texas? What's the percentage, right? And how do you view Texas with respect to all the other states in your situation? For the underfunded and unfunded, right? Or, the unconnected. I'm just curious on the economic landscape of Texas versus the others, because people are moving here in droves, right, from other areas. So I'm just curious how you see that from an overall perspective.
Gotta be honest with you, I didn't understand most of that question. But the only I'll let our beautiful Erin answer more, but like the only thing that comes to my mind is per capita, what we received from BEAD, we're in like 40th place over, where when you stack up how much per capita each state is getting, we are in 40th place. So Erin, you want to please?
Let me see if I can answer this. So repeat the ending of it just one more time for me.
What I was trying to figure out is I'll use the 1.2 million on the BEAD. There's 1.2 million households that are underserved or unserved. What is that on a percentage of the Texas population for total households in Texas, right? And then how does that compare to other states, right? On a percentage of underserved or unserved? Are you 5%? Are you 10% unserved? I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
We're 40th based on total pop or 40th based on underserved plus not served at all?
Yeah, based on total households, right? Because you're measuring it on a household basis.
Yeah. So we're actually measuring BEAD funds based off of broadband serviceable locations, individual buildings, not necessarily households. I want to be very clear about that because we do consider MDUs to be households. If you live in an apartment complex, that's a household. And those individual units could still be considered unserved or underserved. For the BEAD purpose, we're just considering the whole apartment complex as one location that's served or unserved. So that's why numbers get a little skewed up. Andrea said we're in the 40th percentage. So funding is not 40th place in per capita. So that means we're still going to have really high numbers of unserved or underserved. I couldn't tell you a specific number because we haven't done it yet. But how does that impact like Texas, and how do we stack up compared to everybody else? 3.3 is not enough. It's just not enough. We are too big, too diverse. That's not a bad thing. We've got great land. We're very diverse. We're very large. We have a lot of locations, and we have a lot of property that we want to be respectful of. So smaller states are who maybe have smaller amounts of funding, it's still going to go further for them. I mean, like even my home state of Nebraska, I love it. It received a certain amount of funding. It's probably going to get a lot more done in terms of percentages, just because of the way that it is.
Well, you got, there's Census Bureau says 10.5 million households in Texas. 2.73 is the ratio to people. So there you go. If it's 3 out of 10.5, then you're approximately 30%. You've got 30 million people here, and 20 million of them live in Houston, Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio. That's like many states. The rest of the state is obviously huge. So I get your thing. You have a ton of in fact, the open space you have to cover, except for California, is probably larger than any other state. Again, you got 2/3 of your population in your 4 metro areas. And then the rest of it, I'm assuming a good bit of your underserved are rural. And that's the biggest rural space in the country, probably, that's not covered, except perhaps California.
Yeah, Texas has been referred to as a unicorn when it comes to BEAD funding, just because our situation
can
is
see
so
that, yeah.
unique. And if you guys have more questions that, please feel free to email them to me, and our director will be able to get any answers that we weren't able to give you.
So I have an item. I don't know if you saw it yesterday. This is from Telecompetitor. It says AT&T CEO on BEAD. Thumbs up on Texas. Thumbs down on some other states. So somebody likes what you're doing. Says AT&T sees opportunities to apply for funding in the 42.5 million BEAD rural broadband program in Texas and some other states, but likely will not be applied for funding in some other states, said the company CEO John Stankey on the company's fourth quarter earnings call this morning. So we have a couple AT&T guys in the audience that may want to thank you personally for the great job you guys have done. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. We were just talking about that on the way over.
Yeah.
Thank goodness. We tried very hard to get all of their feedback. So I'm glad that there are providers that are excited to apply for our program.
Well, thanks for getting that done before my conference. So I appreciate that.
I do have one more question.
I'm shocked. I feel like this has been an ongoing thing.
This is a kudos to you. I mean, you just heard the comment, they like the program, relatively speaking, right? In Texas, you're moving forward. How do you, when you talk about outreach, do you get on national calls with all the other states and share ideas and try to figure out how to advance this stuff? Because it just seems like a lot of different things. Maybe you can speak a little about that.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So we do attend the State Broadband Leader Network. We have it's every other week. We have a virtual meeting where they kind of brief us on what's going on, and then our director meets with different state broadband directors very often and regularly. I mean, I'm not privy to the exact meeting times, but he is working closely. I mean, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? And Louisiana's ahead of us, so we're learning lessons from what they've done. And, we're really paying attention to what the states, especially the states that are further along in the process with us, so we can see what's working, what's not working. We're definitely working with other states. I knew the answer to one.
Yes. I have another comment for you while we're wrapping it. We have about 3 minutes left, and that is this whole issue of setting the threshold for the unserved and whether to reach them by fiber, and how much will then go to the underserved via fiber or other technologies. It's one of the most fascinating and important, technology industry questions that we have, that you're facing, and one we talked about quite a bit this morning. From world experts in the field of communications. So I really think you're going to have a challenge and an interesting one trying to figure out what that threshold should be and if it's different in different places. So I congratulate you on what you've done so far, and I think you'll find it very interesting going forward.
One final thing, if I may, if you are a provider, helping a community, everyone apply for a CostQuest tiered license to participate in the BEAD Challenge process. Shout out to all of you amazing people getting us through this. Appreciate it.
We have some CostQuest people here too, so in fact, there's a sponsor. So, okay, any further questions? Okay, well, thank you so much, guys.